everybody, it's Meg from Books Off the Beaten Path, and now it is time for the Something Completely Different Part 2. So I've got a book tag coming up, which is the New Year, New Me book tag, and I have all of my supplies and books ready for that. But because I had promised you guys I was going to read some to you, I am going to read some to you, so just be prepared. So here's for Something Completely Different, Part 2. The first story we'll be reading is called The Elemental. Now, this story takes place in December of 1960, and I'm just gonna dive in. I'm gonna try to read you 2 or 3 stories, just a couple of pages. They won't be long. Okay, so here we go. The Elemental. Jane Grayson reached out and put her hand against the window pane. She felt the cold begin to burn into her fingertips. It was too dark outside to see the snow as it continued to fall, but she felt the tiny impacts of the larger flakes when the wind hurled them against the window. She let the cold sear into her thin flesh, and it took all her concentration. She bit her lip, wanting to pull away, but the will to endure the unpleasant sensation was stronger. Finally, with a small cry, she jerked her hand back. She was looking at her red fingertips when Philip knocked once and opened the door. "Here we are, Mrs. Grayson. I've got the milk all nice and warm." Philip set down a tray laden with several pill bottles, a plate of crackers, and a mug of milk on a table in front of the fireplace. The large room was pleasantly warm, except for the edges by the window where Jane Grayson stood. Jane muttered thank you and pulled her pink robe tighter. She turned back towards the windows. Philip, middle-aged with a portly belly, straining inside a warm green sweater, rubbed his hands in front of the fire. "It's a raw night for sure. Roger told me the road is as slick as butter and the snow's piled up as thick as frosting on one of Veronica's cakes." "It's just as well," said Jane, leaning heavily on her cane to move from the window to the bed. She began to turn down the thick comforter. "We get so few visitors anyway. The road might as well be blocked off until spring." She sat on the edge of the bed, removed her slippers, and got under the covers. Philip rushed behind her to prop up some pillows. "Now that's no way to think, Mrs. Grayson. I bet Roger will have that road cleared off before lunchtime tomorrow. No problem at all." She waved her hands at him, a gesture meant for him to stop fussing. "Always with your ever-present optimism, Philip. Veronica is indeed a lucky woman. Tell me, how is she doing?" "Oh, just fine, and thank you for asking." A broad smile on his face, Philip went back to pick up the tray from the table. "Her sister visits her every day, and they walk a bit in the hospital garden, though she tells me it isn't much of a garden, just a few hedges and all. But the doctor says she's doing well and will be home in time for Christmas, and that'll suit her just fine. She can make the gingerbread ornaments for the tree just like she used to." Jane Grayson didn't reply. She wrapped her arthritic fingers around the mug, its warmth a balm to her cold, burned hands. Philip began to open the pill bottles and shake the contents out into his large palm. He cleared his throat and said, "Did you know, Miss Grayson, there's a great grand tree down by the small lake. It would be perfect in the hall, almost as tall as the ceilings, with a nice round look and even branches." She slammed the mug onto the tray. "Philip, no more talk about trees. You know I haven't decided yet, and all this chatter on about trees and ornaments has given me a headache." His face flushed. Philip carefully set the various pills down on the tray. Without a word, he went back to the fire and began to poke at a log. Her bony shoulders fell as she looked at her butler. After 40 years, Philip was more of an old friend than an employee. She felt horrible for snapping at him, especially as she had made a habit of being extra kind to the servants to make up for her late husband's harshness. "I'm so sorry, Philip. It's just that I hate the snow, and it's been getting dark so early, and—" Her voice trailed off. Looking down at the half a dozen pills, she sighed, but she swallowed them down, drowning the bitter taste with the milk. "And I was so looking forward to seeing Nan, but now with all the snow, I'm afraid she won't make it." Philip shook his head, his cheerful voice booming in the too-quiet room. "Now, don't you worry about Nan, Miss Grayson. That girl is pure sunshine. She's liable to melt the snow as she walks on it. She'll be here tomorrow. Mark my words, she will." He walked around the room, checking each window latch, pulling the heavy curtains back against them. Moving back to a tall cabinet, he opened it and took out a heavy Bible, a silver cross, a large bundle of twigs wrapped in a lavender ribbon. All these three he gave to Jane Grayson. Then he took the tray and moved towards the door. A low creak and the sound of something heavy being scraped across the floor above them caused them both to look up at the ceiling. Jane's small body began to tremble. "Did you hear that, Philip?" Philip's usually loud voice sank into a whisper. "I'm sure it's just the wind, Mrs. Grayson," his eyes said, scanning the ceiling. Okay, so that's that one. That's going to be one total video. And then I'll do another total video for the other ones. So that's called The Elemental. Tell me what you think.